Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Wall of Power TV. I'm your host, Paul Metsa. Tonight, we will be going back in the time machine to discuss the storied history of First Avenue, in my estimation, the greatest rock and roll club in the universe. My guest, Chris Riemenschneider, is a music critic at the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. He has written a phenomenal new book about the club, First Avenue, Minnesota's Main Room. It matter-of-factly tells the story of the 50-year history of the club. Chris got his professional start as a music writer at the Austin American-Statesman in Austin, Texas in '95. So we have to chat a little bit about that incredible music city as well. But let's not waste any more time. Welcome to the Wall of Power TV, Chris Riemenschneider.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You've written an amazing book, First Avenue, Minnesota's Main Room. You could almost say the United States Main Room, because First Avenue is probably the most important club in the history of American music in terms of what it's gone through, who it's presented, and that it's been here for almost 50 years.
Yeah, that's really the amazing thing about it is its longevity. I mean, I kind of mentioned in the intro, there's been several books on CBGB, several books on the Fillmore, and you know, those are legendary venues, but ours is still here. Ours is still rocking. It kept going that whole time, you know,
and 7 nights a week.
Yeah, and
for the most part. I mean, there was times that we'll talk about when they almost went under. They closed because of the ceiling collapse and things like that.
Yeah, but no. Other than that, it's been really continuous, and you know, you tie in the legacy of Prince and everything, and at that point it became. I mean, there's few artists, I think, that are that tied to a venue,
right?
And of course, he's one of the, you know, just an upper echelon of artists. So that also makes it amazing. You know, the book is on the Minnesota Historical Society Press, and I love the idea. You know, they run the History Center in St. Paul and got all these great things all around the state. I love the idea of playing up kind of the Minnesota landmark aspect of it. I mean, it really is. You know, we've got the Guthrie.
Well, the new Guthrie.
The new Guthrie, yeah. I know you love the old Guthrie.
Don't get me started, Chris.
Yeah. You know, I think this in terms of cultural institutions, this is Minnesota's greatest.
It's a sacred space.
Yeah.
And First Avenue used to be the Greyhound bus depot.
Yeah, and it was kind of a crown jewel of I mean, its opening was really an event, and which the what was it, the Gophers Men's Orchestra or something played. And
wow.
It's kind of like, well, that's the first group to ever play First Avenue, technically.
I'd love to see that reunion gig.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. But no, it was a huge deal, gorgeous building. And the amazing thing is, and we have some of these photos in the book, you look at these photos and it's kind of hard to make out the layout and everything, but that tiled floor.
Exactly.
It's the same tiled floor.
Isn't that amazing?
Unmistakable. And God, the crap that floor has endured over the years.
And I've spilled more than one drink on there, I'll tell you that. But I loved it in the book.
Blood spilled.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
And God knows what else.
Yeah, right.
But there's a great picture there where you, if you're going to ride the bus to get your tickets, and it's right where the merch tables go now.
Yes, right. And behind the stage, it was a curved, which you can't. Those of us that aren't in the business don't really see behind the stage, but it's a curved wall behind the stage. And that was kind of the gates that you would go out to get to your bus. But that curved wall it's great for acoustics. I mean, that's kind of one of the things that the guys that went in there and opened it, I mean, they all were like, this was meant to be a rock club, and obviously they were right.
For most of us that have been going there, you know, I started going there. I moved to town in '78, so I started going to shows there in '79 and 1980. Yeah. But since 1988, you don't go to a First Avenue show without bumping into Conrad Severson.
Yeah, it's true. He's kind of the face of the club in a way.
And the soul of the club, kind of.
Yeah, he is, and he runs a tight ship there.
He does.
You don't really get in Conrad's way. Many of us have found out, but when you get
he'll be good for 2 free drink tickets. Don't go for the third.
Yes, do never ask him for a drink ticket.
But when I opened the book, he immediately went to Conrad's page, and that picture of him when he had dreadlocks down to his knees.
Yeah, Yeah, I was so disappointed because the Historical Society is planning to do an exhibit on the club in sometime in 2019. And one of the first things I thought of to put on display was Conrad's dreads.
What happened to him?
He donated them. Darn him.
Yeah.
Donated, the locks for kids or whatever. It was great.
What was your impetus to write the book?
I had been thinking about it for quite a while. I'm amazed no one else has written it already.
Right.
I think it's kind of, it's not that it's taken for granted, but it's almost too obvious. It's right there in front of us. So nobody had done it
becomes
before.
invisible because it's so obvious.
Yeah. I covered they had it's covered in detail in the book. They had a nasty bankruptcy court battle in 2004. Which we could maybe talk about later, but that kind of got me on understanding the complex ownership behind it and all these issues. And when the club almost closed, it was huge news, and of course I covered that a lot. So I think maybe even back to then, I'm like, God, this place is historic.
Right.
And we were all crapping our pants over worrying about that place, and it thankfully did reopen after about 3 weeks. But that, and then since then, I also, what actually connected me with the Minnesota Historical Society Press was I did a story on the new owner, Dana Frank. She's the daughter of Byron Frank, who was the longtime accountant for the club and the personal accountant of Alan Fingerhut, who's the guy who originally opened the club. And it was this really kind of I don't want to say dramatic, but a touching story of her dad's retired. He doesn't want a rock club, and kind of put her on the spot. And she had this life out in L.A. She had a good life, and it's like, one of you kids needs to run this. And she stepped up to preserve it. And obviously if you've been following the club at all in recent years, they're doing very well.
You said there's been no books about First Avenue, but a lot of the books, and I want to mention some of the writers in town here who have great books on the music history. Mention First Avenue.
Yeah.
The first guest on the Wall of Power TV was Michelle Leon from Babes in Toyland, and she speaks lovingly of it. But you look at the last handful of years, Rick Sevchak with Everybody's Heard About the Bird. Jim Walsh has a couple of books out.
Yeah.
Michelle Leon, of course. Who am I forgetting?
Well, since
Sin Collins.
Yeah, Sin Collins. She just put one out that touches on First Ave history. It's kind of more centered around the Longhorn in the late '70s punk era. Her book, which is called Complicated Fun, after the Suicide Commando song, of course. And then, of course, Dan Corrigan, great photographer. He's kind of the house photographer at First Ave for so many years. He just put out a photo book as well with Danny Siegelman writing. That one's called Heyday. So yeah, there's been this great run of books, and of course, almost all of them have ties to First Avenue because, of course, it's kind of ground zero of our music scene.
And Corrigan, bless him, there's so many characters that have been through that club, both in terms of the musicians and staff and people that just hung out there. But of course, Monty Lee Wilkes, one of the greatest soundmen of all time and a very good friend of mine, got his real start working that club, and then went on to work with the Replacements on the road from those gigs, Nirvana, eventually Britney Spears, Carrie Underwood, front of house for 80,000 people in Brazil.
Monty died during the making, or during the writing of this book, and he was on my list of people.
Well, he and I got to be very good friends in the last 10 years. He mixed my first show in '84 when I opened up for Taj Mahal when I put my first record out. Then we re-hooked up and got to be very good friends. We're both northern Minnesota boys. And I want to say Dan Corrigan, I got to give a shout out because I called Nate Krantz. I was talking to Brian Drake and I said, Monty needs a star on the wall.
Yeah.
So Nate put it together like that. Corrigan was the one that went up to paint Monty Lee Wilkes. It's just to the left.
I didn't know that. That's beautiful.
It just went to the left of the garage door, next to the parking ramp on the south side of the building. So I happened to be going up north, and so I was able to go see Monty the last few days of his life, and I told him on that Friday. So and what's great about it, and Monty would love it, you see all the rest as kind of uniformed calligraphy or whatever you want to call it in the stars, but Monty Lee Wilkes has that Corrigan kind of chicken scratch, which is beautiful.
Yeah.
So I was able to tell Monty Lee Wilkes on that Friday that that he finally got a star at the on the
that's
wall. And Monty said, "I can die now." And I said, "Monty, that's
Not
not the
yet.
point."
Yeah,
but
yeah,
and then he
sure.
passed a few days later.
Yeah.
But Corrigan painted his name.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's great.
What
Yeah,
were-
well deserved. Monty and another club longtime employee, Miles Kennedy, they both were on the tour of Nirvana of Nevermind, right when the
Started
things
to blow
were
up.
crazy, and of course they stopped at First Avenue on that tour, and they go into pretty good detail on that show, which everyone agrees was amazing, but it was a hell of a tour for those guys to have to. I mean, of course,
On every level.
Yeah, of course, after dealing with the replacements, I'm sure
Right,
everything
anything's-
was a piece of cake.
No doubt. We've got Chris Riemenschneider on for the whole show on Wall of Power TV tonight. We're going to be talking about First Avenue, Minnesota's Mainroom, is great book about the history of First Avenue. We're also going to talk about Austin, Texas, and whatever else is on Chris's mind. We'll be back after these messages. Stick around.
What can you do with so much space? The Solar Arts Building in Northeast Minneapolis. A masterpiece of exposed brick, wooden beams, hardwood floors, and natural light, this unique multi-use space is perfect for a variety of events. To literally top it off, there are over 100 solar panels on the roof, making the Solar Arts Building self-sustainable. You've got the need, we've got the space. The Solar Arts Building, 711 Northeast 15th Avenue in beautiful Northeast Minneapolis. Give them a call at 763-234-5069 or send a message to mike@solarartsbuilding.com.
I want you to meet Two Gingers Irish Whiskey. I'm Kieran and I'm Irish, so I tend to like a challenge. Why not? I wanted a whiskey to help find me out what's out there. Like what's really out there. And I found the oldest distillery in Ireland with a water wheel and awards for its small family of whiskies in the middle of Ireland. As I've always seen it, you can't win the lottery unless you buy a ticket. So try it. The investment is small and the flavor is big. It's perfect for drinking neat, its character holds up, like the Irish, when the bastards try to get you down. Two Gingers Irish Whiskey. Distilled twice for more character, time for more flavor, and less of the old burn. No lite bastardes carborundum. Don't let the bastards get you down.
Welcome back to Wall of Power TV. I'm your host, Paul Metsa. Our guest in the studio for the whole night, author and rock and roll writer Chris Riemenschneider. Chris, you're a Minnesota boy. You grew up in East St. Paul.
Yeah.
Tell us about, there's a great story about you and your buddy, the first show you saw at First Avenue that didn't end well for your pal.
No, my good friend Mark Duford still goes to shows with me all the time. We were 14. It was just coming over from the East St. Paul to Minneapolis was like a whole other world. So it was already a
You
wild
crossed the
adventure.
Berlin, I always called the Mississippi
Yeah.
River the Berlin Wall.
It is.
So you crossed the
it
Berlin
is
Wall.
to folks on the east side,
Yeah.
anyways. And we, when you're a kid, you get to the show right when doors open, or even
Sure.
before doors open. We got there right front center of stage, and it was a metal show. We were young metalheads, as a lot of us were in those days. Anthrax and Metal Church were the bands, and the Metal Church, they were getting wild at the end, and the bassist just started swinging his bass and just whacked Mark right upside the head.
Did he knock him out?
No, but Mark was on the verge of tears. It hurt. He was on the verge of tears, and I'm just like, wow.
And you guys were so close to the stage, you could actually sing into one of the microphones.
Yeah. The Anthrax singer. In the encore they did "Anarchy in the UK," which we knew the words to, and he held up the microphone up to us. And at that point, I'd only been to the arena shows where you're up in the nosebleed
Right.
section, and just to be that front and center.
How much
was
fun.
was amazing.
Well, and that's, I think, another thing that I'm glad you brought it up, because the all ages show
Yeah.
at First Avenue. This
Yeah.
was not a exclusive club by
Yeah.
any means.
Yeah, in fact, that goes back to the Depot era. I mean, a lot of the, like Rod Stewart and the Faces, and geez, a lot of the shows, Alice Cooper, they were all ages shows, which is part of the reason why the Depot didn't last, because a
Right.
lot of the biggest shows were on the nights there wasn't drinking, and that's
Right.
obviously where they make their money. But yeah, through the '80s, they had a lot more all ages show too. I hate to fault the club for not having more. The economics are they make more money off of drinking.
Right.
That's music biz 101.
You were comparing First Avenue, rightfully so, to CBGB's,
Yeah.
the Fillmore East and West, and other places. But I think the one thing that, now the Fillmore had, when it was started in the late 60s into the 70s, they would have blues and folk and rock and roll. But you look over the years to the breadth of music that First Avenue has presented. You're talking everything from the Ramones to King Sunny Ade,
Yeah.
to John Hyatt,
Yeah.
to Joe Wheely, to Lucinda Williams,
Yeah.
to metal, to the dance nights, to EDM,
Yeah.
death metal.
Yeah.
I saw a great show there. My buddy and I, with a head full of something, went down and saw Metallica, Wasp, and who was the third band? I think you read about it.
Armored Saint.
Right,
Armored Saint.
right.
Yeah, no, that's in the book. That was a huge show, obviously.
Yeah,
Metallica.
it was amazing. And I remember my buddy, Jeff Cerniak, leaned to the person next to him and said, "What does WASP stand for?" And you can probably confirm this. And she said, "We are sex perverts."
Yeah, I don't know if they've ever been 100% on that.
Well,
You know, it's
anyway,
one
at
of
that
those-
moment,
yeah.
Cerniak's chair broke and he fell to his ass on the ground. So
Yeah.
it was just kind of one of those, whoa, it's going to be an interesting night.
Yeah. The cool thing about that show, or what people told me about that show, was Wasp was kind of more the LA glam metal. I mean, they had a whole elaborate stage show and
Right.
everything. And here comes Metallica in jean jackets
Right.
and t-shirts. And
With the punk look, really.
yeah, they were more punk than they were
Playing speed
that kind of metal, and blew the roof off the place.
I remember, I had the pleasure of playing in the Mainroom a couple of times with my band. And I think in '85 and '86, we had a show. I was really proud because Steve McClellan told me at the end of the year we were the third highest local band draw, Paul Metsa Group, behind Husker Du, the Gear Daddies, and then us.
Well, that's something.
Yeah,
That's
it felt great. It was, maybe we had 450 people, and the reason why I know how many people we had, because Steve McClellan, who was kind of the Baron von Raschke,
Yes.
who ran the club and really put that club on the map.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we could talk.
He made it what it is.
Steve McClellan could be his own show.
Yeah.
But you would get a readout at the end of the night, how many comps, how many drink tickets, how many paid.
He kept surprisingly good files, and those files are actually on file at the Minnesota Historical Society now, and I poured through them. And I mean, everything from the band's writers were in these files, and it was interesting. I mean, looking at the attendance, I mean, everybody, we think of the '80s, we think of the Replacements and Husker Du being the bands, and of course they are legendary. But for quite a while, they were only getting about 300 or so people.
Right.
You know what bands were packing it pretty much from the get-go were the Suburbs. The Suburbs were already from the Longhorn. They were too big to play the entry.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the Wallets were another band
Right.
that drew really
Steve
well.
Kramer, may rest in peace.
Oh yeah, no, amazing. I saw there's video of the Wallets. I think we have a photo of it in there too. Steve tarred and feathered himself.
Feathered.
And it's just seeing the video of it was amazing. It's rock and roll, man. That was wild.
When we've got Chris Riemenschneider on for the whole show tonight, when did you start to have an inkling that you wanted to become a music writer?
Oh, high school. I started reviewing records for the high school paper over at Harding High in East St. Paul. It's just putting two and two together. sucked
Who were
it.
some other Harding High graduates that we might know over the years?
Mitch Hedberg, the great comedian, the Great Lake comedian.
went
He
to
was
ba-
one of my brother's best friends in high school.
Oh, Mitch was great.
He was hilarious. It's still, I mean, his stuff still stands up. Beautiful stuff, hilarious stuff. Who else from Harding? Boy, I don't know.
Well, you know,
Otherwise,
I've been playing.
Johnson had more of the like Herb Brooks and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I had. I've been honored to play for the last 6-7 years with Willie Walker, East St. Paul guy for 50 years.
Yeah, he lives right over by where I.
There's a lot of soul over there.
Yeah.
So you started to write. Where'd you go to college?
University of Texas in Austin.
Okay.
My dad was a textbook East Sider. Went to work for 3M at age 18 and worked there for 45 plus years. And 3M transferred a bunch of people down to Austin in the late 80s. They built some headquarters down there. We were part of that wave. I was still in high school, so I actually finished high school down there. Went to school at UT in Austin and went to work for the newspaper in Austin.
And what year was that?
That was in '95. I was in Austin a total 12 years and worked for the paper.
So
there.
when did you get down to Austin? What was the year you were going to high school?
88.
Wow, you were that's like one of the golden eras of Austin.
My going line on it is there was no better place to spend your 20s. You know, you're kind of impoverished but wild, irresponsible years. No better place to spend your 20s than Austin in the 90s. You could go out and you could have a great Tex-Mex meal, have a few Shiner box, and see a world-class band for under $20.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you could go to.
Of my life.
I remember my friend Book and Edith Michael lived down there for years.
Yeah, I know Book.
Yeah. And so they, you know, and he was a musician. He played with, you know, Towns and Joe and everybody, Jimmy Dale. But so I kind of had an in to, you know, people down there and places. And, you know, one of the first nights I was down there, I met Larry Monroe, one of the greatest DJs of all time, was at KUT for years.
Yeah.
But I'll never forget, this to me was Austin. You hear about it, you saw Austin City Limits. You read about it in Rolling Stone with Doug Somm. You knew there it was magic.
Yeah.
But you didn't really know until you got there how magical it was.
Yeah.
And I remember walking in the Black Cat Saloon on 6th Street one night, which is, they had the very minimum you needed to be a club. They had a beer cooler, a cash register, risers on each side to sit on, like in a high school gymnasium, a stage, and if I believe the back of the club didn't even have a roof.
They didn't have a roof. I was just going to say they had all that, but no roof.
But no roof.
Lots of the 6th Street clubs are kind of open air, which of course people would light up like crazy.
And I remember, exactly. The other part of Austin I love, but I remember going to see Evan Johns and the H-Bombs.
Oh, yeah.
One of the greatest Telecaster players of all time.
Yeah.
And he was playing his Telecaster through 3 Fender Champ amps that were about that big. And I fell in love with the guy.
Yeah.
And of course, then he completely, you know, blew your mind about how good he and the band, the H-Bombs, were.
It was so cheap to live there. They just had such a great scene. And we didn't get a lot of, like when I started to work for the American Statesman, the newspaper there, you didn't get all the mass touring shows. You know,
Right.
It was that small enough of a town that we didn't get a lot of the tours. So all we had to cover was the local scene, and of course there was plenty to cover in the local scene, and that's really what kind of made me fall in love with covering local music was being there and just having all that to cover.
Well, you know, Chris, I think there's a correlation between the breadth of acts that were presented at First Avenue and the way that music writers covered the local scene in Austin that I don't think was similar in Minneapolis. I think Minneapolis has always lagged behind. The writers up here, I've thought, and I'm not pitching a bitch here, but there's always been these cliques and the new happening, the hot bands of the year. And, you know, in the 80s, man, you couldn't mention Johnny Cash or you know, Townes Van Sant. They paid no attention to it, although you could go see acts like that at First Avenue. Yeah. And the thing that I think, from what I know about Austin, what made it so unique is the writers, Margaret Moser, Louis Black,
God bless Margaret,
Michael Corcoran, when he moved in. They'd cover just about any style of music that was good.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, and they were some of the best music writers, I think.
But and Margaret Moser, may she rest in
Yeah,
peace.
yeah.
I never had to pay for a ticket at the Austin Music Awards during South by Southwest. She always caught me, no matter how busy she was.
Margaret, I think Margaret's actually mentioned in the book.
Really?
She came up for when
Lucinda got married, Lucinda Williams.
Yeah, Lucinda got married on stage. She was good friends with Lucinda, and it was beautiful seeing her and our other friend Chris Gray there at my old friends from Austin. It was great.
When did you come back to Minneapolis then?
2001, right before 9/11, actually. Wow. Yeah, it was. The Austin paper was, just kind of a mid-sized paper, and if you wanted to move up, you got to move to a new city,
Right.
and obviously it made sense to come here, and the Star Tribune at that point was a great paper. Well, it's still a great paper to work
Right.
for, but at that point it really was a very reputable paper to work for, and it made sense.
And at about the same time, Mark Bartell, who cut his chops
right.
at City Pages, goes down
Yeah.
and becomes a hot shot in the publishing part
Yeah.
of the Austin Chronicle.
Yeah.
Still one of my favorite weeklies in the world.
Yeah, it's still independent, which is there's few and far between.
So you come to town right before 9/11. The other big rock and roll music critic, John Bream.
Yeah.
So how was John? How do you treat the new guy in town?
John and I have always we have a groove somehow. We fell right into a groove working together. I had met John actually in Houston. We were covering the Lilith Fair, and he said I'm from St. Paul and whatnot, and of course my first impression was, wow, this guy's sure is talkative.
Right.
And then just several years later, I don't know if, because I'd met him, if that helped me get the job or what, but lo and behold, I'm working with him, and he's always, there's enough to go around.
Right.
The only people we've ever really arm wrestled over covering is Prince and Dylan.
Right.
And of course, there's plenty to cover on Prince and Dylan.
Right.
There has been over the years, that it's never really been an issue. So.
Well, and John Bream, great music writer. I don't agree with him on everything. You shouldn't.
No.
But he's also, he's written a book, I believe, about Led Zeppelin.
Prince and Dylan.
Dylan.
He wrote one of the first Prince books, actually. It's kind of a collector's item now, because
Right.
there's a lot of rare photos in it.
And Prince, I forget where he was playing, ripped up a John Bream review
That was
on stage.
Arsenio Hall's show. He burned it. Had
God bless him.
Yeah. You're famous at that point as a music writer. Prince is burning your review. Another time, Prince had a super soaker on stage and just right at John Bream blasted him. Yeah.
We've got Chris Riemenschneider on for the whole show on the Wall of Power TV. Great book. Just loving it, called First Avenue, Minnesota's Mainroom. Any of your music-loving friends and family, here's your Christmas or birthday gift for them.